let's talk about why Palestinians in East Jerusalem are losing their homes.
Jerusalem is a place unlike anywhere else in the world, an ancient city that's considered holy in Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. It's also home to Israelis and Palestinians who both claim the city as their capital, although Jerusalem's status has never been settled, nor has the issue of a Palestinian state.
You have both Israelis and Palestinians that live within essentially a shared city, but that city is not necessarily shared to the fullest extent.
East Jerusalem is the side of the city that's considered Palestinian territory under international law, but it's under Israeli military occupation. And for years, we've been seeing things like this. Palestinian families being evicted from their homes. Their houses are getting torn down. At the same time, Israeli settlements are expanding.
With every eviction, every demolition, the space for Palestinians in East Jerusalem is steadily shrinking.
The Israeli government has often said these are just real estate disputes. But when you speak to the people involved, it's clearly so much more than that.
أنا اللي بعرفه إنه هلا في معي قطعة أرض، جزء من أرض فلسطين، جزء من القدس لازم أحافظ عليه، راح أتمسك فيه.
The Arabs that they say this is Palestine, they lie. The Bible says this land belonged to the Jewish people.
There are so many layers to what's going on.
So we've come to East Jerusalem to help you get a sense of what's actually happening and why.
Noura Gates Sublaban is taking us to the apartment where she was born and had lived her whole life. Until she was evicted in July 2023. She fought a long legal battle that went all the way to the Israeli Supreme Court.
كتير صعب. أنا بعد الإخلاء هلا أول مرة أنا أجي. كتير صعب إني أشوف البيت ومش رح أقدر أدخله. أنا كل ليلة بالحلم بشوفه. فالبيت جزء كبير مني ومن حياتي ومن قلبي ومن ماضيي ومن ذكرياتي.
Eviction cases like Noura's are mostly being driven by Israeli settler organizations. These are well-funded groups that promote Jewish settlement in Palestinian neighborhoods. In Noura's case, a settler group obtained ownership of the property and then built a case to kick Noura out, even though she had what's called protected tenancy. We'll explain that later.
قعدت في بيتي مبسوط وحامل مسدس وشتيت.
To understand what's going on in cases like Noura's, we need to take things back to 1948. After Israel proclaimed itself a state on land that had previously been Palestine under British control. 5 Arab countries went to war with Israel, and there was a massive displacement of people, including more than 700,000 Palestinians who fled or were forced from their homes. This was also a period when hundreds of thousands of Jews were being expelled from Arab countries. The war ended with a set of agreements that divided the land between Israel and Arab-controlled territories, separated by what's called the Green Line. Jordan controlled the West Bank, Egypt controlled Gaza, and Jerusalem was split in two. Israel controlled West Jerusalem, Jordan controlled East Jerusalem, which includes the Old City, a walled-off area where the main religious sites are. In 1967, there was another war, and Israel seized and occupied more land, including East Jerusalem and the West Bank. But the 1949 Green Line still represents the internationally recognized borders of Israel.
So technically, the Green Line runs through here, dividing West Jerusalem and East Jerusalem. But in practice, you can see there's no actual separation here, and Israel applies its own set of laws on both sides, even though according to international law, East Jerusalem is Palestinian territory under occupation, so it's not considered sovereign Israeli territory.
And under international law, the occupier is supposed to stick to certain rules.
Thank you.
An occupying power is not allowed to apply its own legal system in the occupied territory. An occupying power is not allowed to transfer civilian populations from their homes or to deport them. Israel still continues to do that. The wrong law is being applied and the wrong courts are being applied.
And it's through the Israeli court system that evictions are being enforced in East Jerusalem. Since 1970, it's estimated that more than 160 families have been evicted. Right now, another 200 families, around 1,000 people, are at risk. The eviction process usually starts with settler groups obtaining ownership of a property where Palestinians live. And there's one Israeli law that's really important here.
The Legal and Administrative Matters Law, and essentially what it does is it affords land restitution rights to Jews who allegedly owned properties in East Jerusalem prior to 1948. What does that mean? It essentially grants them the right to reclaim assets that they lost in the 1948 war. Now, it is extremely discriminatory because there is no parallel legal mechanism for Palestinians who lost properties in the same war.
So if we go back to Nora's case, an Israeli settler group was able to claim ownership of the apartment based on that law. But Nora still had a right to live there because she had that protected tenancy we mentioned earlier. It's a type of long-term lease that Jordan granted to Palestinian refugees while it was in charge of East Jerusalem. After Israel took over in 1967, Palestinians, like Nora's family, were allowed to keep those leases, but under strict conditions. Once settlers got the rights to Nora's apartment, they spent decades trying to convince the Israeli courts that she'd broken those tenancy conditions. And they finally managed to evict her in 2023.
What we've seen is that over the years, you have settler organizations or groups that have exploited and continue to exploit this 1970 law to acquire the rights or alleged rights to these properties and remove the protected tenancy from the Palestinian family. They are radical settler groups that have a particular aim and goal, which is to Judaize or Israelize Jerusalem. It's not just these fringe settler groups that are working individually and working by themselves. They are aided and abetted by the state on all levels.
The ministries, the municipality, and laws and courts are all instrumentalized in order to displace Palestinians as much as possible and increase the Jewish population in Jerusalem. This is a stated goal for Israel. They are not shy about it.
Especially in recent years, as Israel's government has become increasingly right-wing and pro-settler politicians have been given senior positions. People like Itamar Ben-Gvir, who became National Security Minister in 2022. He's a settler himself, a member of the parliament, and leader of a far-right party called Jewish Power. Before he became a minister, Ben-Gvir often came to the neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah to show his support for settlers. He even set up a makeshift office right outside this house where the Salem family live.
أنا هو المواليد الدار هاي يعني. أولادي أنا كلهم جبتهم بالدار هاي. هذا ابني الكبير. لا مش الكبير لسه في أكبر منه.
Recently, a settler activist bought the rights to the Salem family's house and is trying to revive an eviction order from the 1980s that was never enforced. And while Fatima and her family are fighting to stay in their home, they also face harassment from settlers.
انولدت في هذا البيت، عشت طفولتي في هذا البيت وفي الأرض برا كمان. للأسف يعني اليوم صاروا أولادنا كمان كانوا يلعبوا فيها وبعدين هلا صاروا أولادنا بطلوا يقدروا يلعبوا فيها يعني. فطبعا من اعتداءات المستوطنين المتكررة علينا على الحي، مش بس كعائلة سالم في حي الشيخ جراح.
ضربوني ورشوني غاز وضربوا ابني طلع دفعوني على الارض طلعوا شو عملوا لي ليش ما عم سخطني بايده هيك سخطني بايده
والله يما ما بننام الليل اقول لك بننام عيني مغمضه وعيني مفتحه يعني نقول هلا بيهجموا علينا
وحتى بيهددونا كمان وبيقولوا احنا بدنا نحرقكم في بيوتكم زي ما حرقنا دوابشه. يعني هم بيفتخروا في عمل الاجرام اللي هم بيعملوه.
Most weeks, there are rival protests in Sheikh Jarrah between Palestinians and activists who support their cause and settlers. Fatima's one of the regulars. So is the settler trying to evict her, Yonatan Yosef, who's a member of the Jerusalem City Council.
It's your house?
It's my house.
Why is it your house?
Because I buy from the people that they have documents that this house belongs to them. I buy it and I have laws. And according to the law, this is my house. I'm here because the Bible says this area, all the land of Israel belong to the Jewish people.
But today, Jerusalem is important to Muslims, to Christians, to so many millions of people.
Very important, but it belongs to the Jewish.
So you've got settler groups pursuing evictions of Palestinians through Israeli courts. That's one pattern playing out. Another is the way Palestinians are getting squeezed out of East Jerusalem through restrictions on construction and the demolition of homes that the Israeli authorities classify as illegal. It comes down to the rules that Israel imposed after 1967 about how land is allocated and who can build what and where. Only 13% was zoned for Palestinian construction and residential development. But those areas were already built up, so there's no real space for new houses, and building anything, like an extension for a growing family, requires a permit from the Jerusalem municipality. The process can take years, it's expensive, and applications are very often rejected, so many Palestinians build anyway without permits. At least a third of Palestinian homes in East Jerusalem don't have the right permits and are therefore considered illegal by Israel, which puts all those homes at risk of demolition. Arya King is a prominent settler activist who's now a deputy mayor of Jerusalem.
Arabs are not above the law. Arabs, if they want to build legally, they can build legally.
So one thing is having the option to build, another thing is being granted the building permits. And, several organizations say that just doesn't happen for Palestinians.
Arabs should not come and cry why our house is being demolished when they choose to build illegally. But they choose not to build with a permission because they save time, they save money, and they don't pay tax.
It's not as if Palestinian families want to go and build illegally or unlawfully according to Israeli law. It's that there is a near complete inability to obtain these building permits. The rate of approval is very, very low. Compared to what is being built and what is being approved for Jewish Israelis, you can see just the stark disparity between that.
So just to give you an idea of where everything is, up there is the old city. This entire area is a Palestinian neighborhood of Silwan. You can see just how close everything is. Over on this side are several ongoing eviction cases. And then down here, this entire section is subject to an Israeli demolition plan.
It's called Al Bustan, and the Jerusalem municipality wants to redevelop the area and create a biblical-themed garden that would link up to other religious and archaeological sites nearby. There are more than 100 houses here, and most of them are considered illegal because they don't have the right permits, even though Palestinians own the land. Like Nidal al-Rajabi, who's got a demolition order on his house. He sees the garden plan and all the technicalities around building permits as a pretext for something bigger.
هدفهم ترحيلنا من هذه الأرض. فأنا توجهت وأي شيء بتطلب مني إني أرخص بيتي اللي أنا موجود فيه أنا مستعد له أمشي له. بس هم رافضين هذا الشيء. المشروع اللي مقدمينه البلدية اللي هو هذا تقريبا اللي هو هاي حي البستان. كل المناطق الخضراء هيدي يستولوا عليها. احنا طبعا العمل اللي قمنا فيه هون حي البستان جماعي من سنة 2000. جبنا مهندسين، محامية، قدمنا مخططات. أي مخطط احنا بيطلع منا البلدية عليها اعتراضات، اللي هي بتوفر لأولادنا عيشة كريمة، منتزهات، كل إشي 100% لحي لأهل البلد إنا. بس هم مخططاتهم تهدف إنهم يجيبوا المستوطنين هون. الحكومة والبلدية والطبيعة والآثار كليتهم والمستوطنين كلهم جسم واحد، كلهم بيشتغلوا للاستيطان، كلهم بيشتغلوا، كلها حكومة متطرفة.
So across East Jerusalem, Palestinians are fighting to hold on to their homes and neighborhoods.
At the same time, there's more money and more land being allocated for Israeli Jews to settle here.
12 Israeli settlements have been built in East Jerusalem since 1967. Over the years, they've expanded and become established residential areas with lots of amenities like parks and schools. It's been a while since any new Israeli settlements were built, but that's now changing.
We are along the southern perimeter of East Jerusalem. What we're seeing right now, we're seeing a lot of the construction of the foundation and infrastructure on the area in Givat Matos. Givat Matos is slated to be the first new settlement in East Jerusalem to be built in the past 20 years. We're talking about thousands of housing units that are designated for Jewish Israelis, even though it is surrounded by Palestinian neighborhoods. You actually have basically a series of different settlement plans that are along the southern perimeter. You see, if you kind of connect the dots, how it creates this entire wedge of Israeli settlement building. You cut off East Jerusalem from the southern West Bank. There is then no territorial contiguity necessary for a viable Palestinian state with a capital in East Jerusalem.
That idea is central to the so-called two-state solution that was agreed 30 years ago as the basis for peace. So, a Palestinian state alongside Israel, with East and West Jerusalem becoming their respective capitals. Global leaders still cling to the idea, but in practice, any kind of peace process has been dead for years. And what's happening in East Jerusalem helps to confirm that.
So, what's written here?
هذا مكتوب وطني ليس حقيبة وأنا لست مسافر. يعني أنا مرات لما بقرأ هذا البيت بتخيل إنه انكتب إلنا، وإحنا بنقولها إنه وطننا ليس حقيبة، وإحنا هون موجودين مش مسافرين. بالنسبة للي هون مكتوب لن نهدم بيوتنا بأيدينا. إحنا كرامتنا ما بتسمح لنا إن نخضع لكم في ظلمكم.